Good morning, everyone. I'm Joe Amster. I serve as president of our congregation. I'm so glad to see all of you. Welcome. If you've been here forever or this is your first time, we welcome you today. Today we actually have a guest speaker with us, and I'll let you know a little bit more about Reverend Mary Margaret. Reverend Mary Margaret Earl has served as Executive Director and Senior Minister of the Unitarian Universalist Urban Ministry for 2 years. During her time, she has worked to strengthen bonds between UUs and the Roxbury neighborhood, where the UUUM, Unitarian Universalist Urban Ministry, operates. She is on the leadership team of the Moral Revival and Moral Mondays Planning Group for Boston, Massachusetts, working with a coalition reclaiming what it means to be religious in the public square. Prior to her arrival at the UU Urban Ministry, she spent 10 years at Macaulay Ministries, a faith-based nonprofit in Providence, Rhode Island that provides food, shelter, and clothing to those who are homeless or at risk of becoming so. She is past president of the board of the Rhode Island Coalition for the Homeless, recipient of the 2014 Heroes of Faith Award from the Rhode Island State Council of Churches for her interfaith work, and served on the Pro Bono Advisory Board, which brings together large Providence law firms and underserved communities in need of free legal assistance. I'm looking forward to hearing more from Mary Margaret today.
1, 2. The new day is dawning, let's greet it with singing, the hills and the mountains with merry tunes ringing. Hey, tooly, 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 toola, hey, tooly, 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 ho.
The new day is dawning, let's greet it with singing. The new day is dawning, let's greet it with singing.
The new day is dawning, let's greet it with singing. The hills and the mountains with merry tunes ringing. Hey, tooly, 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 toola, hey, tooly, 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 ho. The new day is dawning, let's greet it with singing. The hills and the mountains with merry tunes ringing. Hey, tooly, 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 toola, hey, tooly, 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 ho.
This world is full of unrest, and we witness it, read it, absorb it, awaken daily to the worry of it. There is so much we know and only so much we can do. Our arms and hearts are full. Come into this space and find friendship. Come into this space and breathe and be. Come with loss and heartache, with anxiety and anger. Come with celebration and pride. Come with joy. Come and breathe and be as you are. Come and remember sacred truths, the power in being together, the hope in holding hands and weaving ourselves into community, the promise that unfolds when we open ourselves to music and silence, prayer and contemplation, the possibility of something new. Come into this sacred space, sacred not by brick and mortar, but by our intention to worship together, to be called anew, sacred by our commitment to move together in love and walk on a journey together for peace and justice. Come, let us worship together. I invite you to join me in singing our opening hymn, number 38, Morning Has Broken. invite us to remain in this time of reflection, contemplation, prayer, and presence as we hold all those joys and sadnesses that have been shared in this community, as we hold all the unrest in the wider world, as we center ourselves in our own being and reflect on how we can be lights in a broken world, as we reflect on how we can call one another to our highest selves in responding to turmoil in the wider world, as we find within ourselves hope, courage, strength, and faith. I invite us to listen to the words of the poet Wendell Berry. Horseback on Sunday morning, harvest over, we taste persimmon and wild grape, sharp, sweet of summer's end. In time's maze over fall fields, we name names that went west from here, names that rest on graves. We open a persimmon seed to find the tree that stands in promise, pale in the seed's marrow. Geese appear high over us, pass, and the sky closes. Abandon, as in love or sleep, holds them to their way, clear in the ancient faith. What we need is here. And we pray not for new earth or heaven, but to be quiet in heart and in eye clear. What we need is here. Amen. Blessed be. Our reading this morning is from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 10, verses 38 through 42. As Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She had a sister called Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to him and said, "Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Tell her to help me." "Martha, Martha," the Lord answered, "you are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed, and indeed only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her." So ends our reading. At this time, your gifts for the work of this congregation will be given and gratefully received.
Easy to be
It was a big night at the UU Urban Ministry last month. We had invited Roxbury leaders and neighbors and our UU friends to come and learn more about our historic meeting house, First Church Roxbury, and the restoration project that we have underway. We've spent a lot of time in the last 2 years building relationships with our UU supporters and the African American and Muslim communities that hug our campus in John Eliot Square in the Roxbury neighborhood of Boston. Planning took time. There was organ music and trumpet players and food. I was planning my speech. I carefully crafted words to embrace our location at the intersection between communities. I wrote about the importance of our meeting house. I wrote in remembrance of Sandra Bland, Eric Garner, Michael Brown. I wrote about the strength and beauty and richness of Roxbury as I have come to know it. There would be singing and the ringing of our Paul Revere bell. And then the finale. Workers hung a banner outside the meeting house that celebrated a national historic preservation campaign that seemed an appropriate slogan to celebrate First Church Roxbury. It said, "This place matters." And our plan was, after the words and the music, to stream out of the meeting house, turn on our floodlights, and raise a toast with Roxbury russet cider and unveil the banner, carefully hung from our scaffolding and covered with silver paper. And then, just before the event, someone came to me and said quietly, "Do you think that a banner saying 'This place matters' diminishes the spirit of Black Lives Matter, as if a place matters more than lives?" The question came from someone who is African American, a lifelong Roxbury resident, an activist. I stepped back, and I will confess what I actually felt in that moment: stuck and defensive. I had, after all, the best of intentions. I had thought deeply about how to ensure that this was an inclusive event and one that acknowledged the richness of the African American community in which our ministry dwells. I had put a lot of work into that unveiling. I held my breath, and then I exhaled, and then I listened. If there is a common thread that runs through the upheavals and unrest in the United States this year, it is the ways that we are divided. Divided by class and region and educational level and gender and race and perception. Many of us spend most of our lives surrounded by people who look a lot like us. Our friends are like us, our neighbors, our colleagues, even our Facebook connections often mostly look and think a lot like us. These separations result in misunderstanding and unsettling disparities. Some of them can be touched and seen and measured. In the richest part of Boston's Back Bay neighborhood, where residents are mostly white and affluent, the average life expectancy is 30 years more than the poorest part of mostly African American Roxbury. According to the 2015 Color of Wealth in Boston report by the Federal Reserve Bank, white households in Boston have a median net worth, not income, but net worth, of about $250,000. The median net worth of Black households, almost zero. Health, employment, education, dropout rates, all disparate and traceable back to the ways that we are segregated. Some divisions are less tangible, like our interpretation of things. According to a recent Pew Research study, for example, the perceptions of African Americans on injustice and racism are worlds apart from that of white people. African Americans are far likelier than whites to say they are treated unfairly in the workplace, in banking, in the criminal justice, and educational systems. When we become estranged from people whose skin, language, culture, economic reality, history, and neighborhood is so different from ours, when we are surrounded by people and perspectives so much like ours, we can easily dismiss or even vilify another perspective because we don't really understand it or even see it. Our perceptions are rooted in what we have learned and experienced and the other lives that we touch. This past week, I attended a conference at MIT on building a more inclusive Boston. And among our speakers were scientists from MIT who discussed the neuroscience of bias. Most of the processes that sort people into category like these are dangerous or to be avoided happen in our vast subconscious. We don't even know we're doing it. And so our goal is to strive to bring that to the surface, to face it in ourselves if we are to be part of making any real change. And some of that means going outside worlds that look like ours. Consider the lessons of a common garden or a farm field abundant with corn or wheat. Because it seems easier, because it seems more profitable, farmers sometimes plant the same crop year after year. You need just one set of tools to master that crop, to plant it and tend it and harvest it. But that sameness takes a toll. The soil is sapped of nutrients. Disease and pests grow bolder until only chemicals can halt them. And so modern farmers are returning to the practices of old, now called biodiversity farming. A rosemary crop is planted alongside buckwheat. They improve the soil in an orchard and help them all. There is resilience in difference. It is more complicated, but it's what lasts. In my small experience here, on the night of our big event, I heard from someone whose experience is different from mine, who saw things differently. I held my breath, and then I exhaled, and then I listened. We weighed whether or not to hang the banner. We wrestled together. In the end, we did unveil it when I could contextualize it, when I could say to all those gathered what it represented in celebrating Roxbury. But right after, we took it down so that passersby who didn't know the context wouldn't in the days later see it and consider it a sign of disrespect. I am certain that the perspective shared with me saved me from pushing away some of our Roxbury neighbors. In my work at the Urban Ministry, I continue to learn daily that listening is one of the most important tasks in building relationships across difference, in cultivating a shared community. For 185 years, the UU Urban Ministry has reached across difference and served Greater Boston. Today, we offer services and housing for survivors of domestic violence at our Renewal House shelter. We have enrichment and educational programs for children and high school students from Roxbury, Dorchester, and Mattapan. Our UU volunteers tutor and coach and develop relationships and learn meaningful lessons about the reality of lives that are different from theirs. But our reach in Roxbury is even broader than that, and our focus on building relationships is broader too. Roxbury is the heart of the historic African American community in Boston and home to a growing Muslim and immigrant population too. On our campus, in our social justice forums and cultural events, in our task forces and on our board, we are striving to create intersections and connections that weave people together across differences into a shared purpose. We are striving to create an inclusive community of people connected by their longing for a better world and figuring out together how we can build it. That is the heartbeat of our work. The work for justice, which is our ultimate aim, relies on working together for change, working with, not for, those impacted by injustice. The work relies on a deeper understanding, a stronger alliance, and a sense of connectedness with African American and Muslim and immigrant sisters and brothers. That is the heartbeat of our work. And we are learning as we go. This morning I wanted to share 4 lessons from my work in Roxbury so far, what I'm learning. Listening is the first. We know that to listen is the wisdom of a happy marriage, or a good parenting, or a solid friendship. It is the wisdom of the first date. Ask questions, absorb the answers. In the book called Toxic Charity, the urban activist Robert Lupton describes how religious communities with good intentions sometimes fail to build sustainable and meaningful relationships in the places where they serve. They rush in to fix and save. He wrote this: "For some reason, healthy people with hearts full of compassion forget fundamentals when it comes to building healthy relationships with those they attempt to serve. Forging ahead to meet a need, we often ignore the basics: mutuality, reciprocity, accountability," he wrote. And healthy relationships are essential. They are the building blocks to making change. The second lesson: listen not just with our ears, but with our hearts. We have to be willing to open up, to be challenged in order to be changed. And we must be changed ourselves if we are to make broader change. In our reading, we heard the story of when Jesus and his disciples stopped at the house of a woman named Martha. As Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to him and asked, "Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Tell her to help me." "Martha, Martha," the Lord answered, "you are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed, and indeed only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her." As someone who is naturally more like Martha, a doer and a fixer, I have often felt annoyed with that story. I don't know if anybody else has ever felt annoyed by it. It really wasn't until reflecting on our work in Roxbury and the sermon that I really saw the wisdom in it. Because Mary's virtue was in being fully present, in attending with heart to the lesson that was in front of her, not by jumping in and fixing things. And so it is with the work, and so it is with those who seek to engage with communities impacted by injustice. We need to learn them first by heart. Since arriving at the urban ministry, I have fallen in love with Roxbury, which has a stronger sense of identity than any community in which I have lived or worked. Headlines about the shootings or the turmoil in Roxbury tell a narrow and insufficient story. In Roxbury, I witness a deep sense of history and culture and community. You can come to Roxbury and visit the National Center for Afro-American Arts, or eat at the Haley House Cafe, or take an art walk with Discover Roxbury, visit abundant community gardens. There is poverty and violence in Roxbury, and the impact of decades or even centuries of segregation in our country plays out and is visible there. But when we go open to learning, not fixing, there is so much more than that. It's how we learn about ourselves and the ways we have absorbed messages of racism and classism, and how we learn what is needed to make real change. Lesson 3, don't be afraid of making mistakes. In order to engage others authentically, we are going to make mistakes. Our desire to be good, to preserve our reputation, is a strong and understandable tug of our human condition. It is perhaps more easily accomplished through simple charity, giving bread to the hungry, than encountering others across difference. Building real and mutual relationships with people who are different from us is riskier. We might say the wrong thing. We might do the wrong thing. We might feel awkward and ill at ease, but tolerating discomfort is how we can be part of the change we seek. If things are always comfortable, if we are always comfortable, we remain part of the status quo. Trying and fumbling and falling down and trying again is ultimately what builds trust. This past summer, I became part of a team of clergy bringing the Reverend William Barber and the Moral Revival to Boston. Have people heard of Reverend William Barber? Anybody heard of him? Just a few, okay. He founded the Moral Mondays movement in North Carolina. It's a movement that demands inclusivity, and it calls on all people to stand against racism, sexism, poverty, homophobia, and Islamophobia. In Boston, we gathered as religious leaders across race and gender and sexual orientation and faith to plan the revival and an action at the Massachusetts State House in Boston. And in working together, there were mistakes. The State House action fell on Eid, a most important Muslim holiday, which meant that Muslim leaders could not attend, which our new Muslim friends pointed out. And our response? To listen, to acknowledge mistakes, to apologize, to keep talking, and to move forward together. And lesson 4, we can have hope of change. It is easy to be discouraged if we pay attention to the news. There is so much division in our country right now. And this week, when I was at the conference at MIT, I met a Muslim speaker who was from California, who was sharing her experience of American Muslims since 9/11 and of the moments that she has felt unsafe in this, her own country. And after she spoke, I went up and I introduced myself to her as a Unitarian Universalist minister, and her face broke open into this big smile, and she said, "I love the Unitarians." And she told me of one day she was picking up her daughter from school at a time that she felt very vulnerable, and she passed a UU church. She didn't really know what it was, and she had a banner that said, "We stand with our Muslim neighbors," and she burst into tears because it was the first time she had seen in public a proclamation of solidarity with Muslims. The work that we do as people of faith to reach out and stand with those who've been marginalized, it makes a difference. At the UU Urban Ministry, we are living out those UU values in real relationships. We are a platform for people to connect. We connect volunteers with nonprofits doing important work in Roxbury. We have a series of in-depth trainings for volunteers that is coming up later this month. We have community suppers and cultural and educational events, all open to our Roxbury neighbors and our UU neighbors. I thank First Unitarian in Canton for being part of that work by being a member of the urban ministry. And I invite you to continue to join our work as a volunteer or simply to come to an event. You can sign up in social hour to be on our email list and hear of all sorts of opportunities. I invite you to reach out to heal the ways that we as humans have become estranged, to be part of rebuilding a world that becomes more like the gardens and fields that are rich with difference and that will last, to show up not perfectly, not to fix or to save or safe from mistakes, but with human hearts that are set on love and kinship and ultimately on justice. Amen, and blessed be. I invite you to stand and join with me in singing our closing hymn, number 131, Love Will Guide Us. with one another and with those outside of these walls. Go out with outstretched hands, with fingertips reaching, with opening hearts. Go out ready to do the sacred work of expanding our circles of community to acknowledge the fullness of human community. Go out open and reaching. Go in peace.